This is a presidential panel on publishing part 1. My name is Erika Busse. My pronouns are she, her, ella. As associate professor in the sociology department and member of the Latin American Studies program and Urban Studies steering committees at Macalester College in Minnesota. Before we can talk about sociology, power, and equality, we must acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Togia people. Let's offer this prayer, as Carmela Roiba mentioned this morning, to the land where we are. Sociologists for Women in Society acknowledges the academic institutions, indeed the nation state itself, were founded upon and continue to enact exclusions and erasures of indigenous peoples. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle ongoing legacies of settler colonialism and to recognize the hundreds of indigenous nations who continue to resist, live, and uphold their sacred relations across their lands. We also pay our respect to indigenous elders past, present, and future, and to those who have stewarded the land throughout the generations. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We will follow the order that appears in the program. So we will have Tracy Orr first, then we will have Andrea Boyles. Hard for me to say Andrea, since I know you as Andrea. Sorry, Victoria Reyes, and we will conclude with Roberta Villalón. I will read a short bio before each presenter. So bear with me. As you know, all the presenters have prepared for a 10-minute presentation where they will highlight strategies, insights, and all the things that they have learned in the process of publishing. And after their presentations, we will have some time for Q&A from you all who are here with us. So it's my great pleasure, and my person from Minnesota, even though neither of us is from Minnesota originally, but we live now in Minnesota. Tracy Orr from St. Cloud State University. I should say that the first class that I ever taught in the US as a graduate student, I used The Construction of Difference, edited by Tracy Orr. She's a professor of sociology at St. Cloud State University. She received her PhD in sociology from the University of Michigan and is an active member of the American Sociological Association, along with, of course, the SWS, and she's a past president from the SWS. But the most important thing is that besides publishing and working, she's also very committed to her work with St. Cloud State University Community Garden, which she established in 2005. And if you know her, you will see something about a vegetable on here. You can ask her later. So the floor is yours, Tracy.
And I'm honored to be here, especially among these people, because I was saying earlier, don't make me go first, because I didn't write a whole book, So I feel a little bit illegitimate, but that's nothing new in my own origin story in academia in the first place. Just so I can't do a normal presentation. I'm like my mother, I tell a story and I'll try to tell it as linear as possible. So there you go. Also, this is like the first time I'm wearing pants in like 3 months, so I don't really feel like I'm in academic drag. But as a first generation college student whose mother graduated from high school, my dad did not, and as I think the only offspring to not wind up in prison, I've never really felt like I belonged in the academic world. And I still sometimes feel, as Mary Romero was talking about, like, how does it feel to be the problem? I still feel like that most days. But I try to do that in a way that is good. So I have this text right now called The Social Construction of Difference and Inequality, Race, Class, Gender, Sexuality. It's in its 8th edition. It's with Oxford Press. And I tell you to go talk to the people in the book exhibit, but I stopped by there earlier today and the guy knew nothing about my book and forgot copies of it and it's not even in their catalog. Oops. And the new edition just came out. So that's another part of, in terms of, we're supposed to be talking about demystifying the process of writing and publishing. And part of it is learning how to be your own advocate, even when you feel like you don't have a right to be. So the book came about, and I'm so glad Beatrice is here because she's part of the origin story, actually. Yay. I was teaching at University of Illinois at Urbana. I had 700 students in a room, and I was every book publisher's best friend as they came to try to sell me their copy of Intro to Sociology. And I looked at all of them, and I hated every single one. And I never used any of them. And to this day, I've never used any of them because it often centered all the folks who were already centered, and the other was missing. I was missing, folks of color were missing, Indigenous people were missing, critical perspectives were missing. If anything, we were little boxes. And after teaching there for a couple of years, and having this dissatisfaction with text, for example, even our race texts are like inaccurate stories of our history in America, not accurate at all. I worked with my students and some of my TAs and asked them what would they want to see in a book. And the book today is an evolution of that. A book that would center the other, make the invisible visible, being mindful of intersectionality and how it can be a tool for working towards social justice, and trying to figure out how do we get stuff in front of our students that will transform their minds and help them develop these ideas around inquiry and praxis, and how systems of stratification and inequality and injustice are formed, perpetuated, and interconnected. So that's kind of where the book came from. I originally signed with a publishing company that no longer exists, Mayfield Publishing. And I went with them intentionally because they were a small press and I wanted to have some control over the text. It was then consumed by a publisher that no one should ever work with, McGraw-Hill. I'll name them. They are exploitative of their authors, exploitative of the students who purchase their text. So I would encourage you if you're thinking about that. But I think that there are opportunities. So I know these brilliant folks are going to talk about the books that they've written and these wonderful things that they've done. But I also think that for those of us who are in the academy who aren't necessarily working or having the resources or the energy, or even that's our purpose to write these volumes. I did my dissertation, for example, on, this is an example of how I was always a troublemaker. So my dissertation in 1992 that I started was on negotiation of gender meaning in long-term lesbian couples, a qualitative study at the University of Michigan. All of those things don't go together, but I still did that. And I actually finished that dissertation when I finished the first edition of this text. Don't recommend that either. But my whole purpose, in part because of my history of coming from a non-academic world and a non-academic space, I was always trying to figure out how can I make sure that what I'm doing is having an effect right now. So I haven't had the focus of writing a book about my dissertation, for example, or anything like that, but trying to figure out how can I get out teaching tools to people to transform the students that I work with. So that's where where this came from. We're now in our 8th edition, and in this era of a global pandemic. Thank you, Roberta. Where you are. There you are, over there. I'm used to you being there. Doing this 8th edition was probably the most complex thing I've ever encountered, with trying to figure out how do we bring in the pandemic and structural racism that I was already there, but white people just figured it out. And so like, how do we add some more things in there? Citing Indigenous scholars, sociologists of the Global South, voices that are unheard, in ways that gets our work. And if you look at the most recent edition, it is a lot of SWS people in there, which makes me very proud, in front of our students, because our students don't read Gender and Society. right? My undergrad students don't read Gender and Society, but they will get a text. So how can we get our textbooks in ways that have these critical perspectives, the intersectionality, all of the things that have been talked about today at this conference in front of them, so they can develop a critical understanding of structural inequality towards working towards social justice. And that's basically what I wanted to say. So I can answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Tracy, and thank you for your wisdom. Now we are going to invite Andrea Boyles from Tulane University. Andrea is an award-winning author of books You Can't Stop the Revolution, Community, Disorder, and Social Ties in Post-Ferguson America, published by UC Press in 2019. And the other book is Race, Place, and Suburban Police, Too Close for Comfort, UC Press 2015. She's not only a member of Sociologists for Women and Society, but she is the SWS NGO delegate to the United Nations Economic and Social Council. Welcome, Andrea, to this panel. Thank you.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thank you so very much for such a kind intro. I'm very appreciative of this panel and opportunity to be able to share some of my publishing experiences and hopefully take questions. So just to start off with, again, I'm author of You Can't Stop the Revolution, Community Disorder and Social Ties in Post-Ferguson America, and also Race, Place, and Suburban Policing, Too Close for Comfort. And my colleagues, some of them may not know, but as recently as maybe a month now, I have since signed off on a third contract with a third book underway. So I'm very excited, again, for not the issue per se, but I'm excited about the platform. As many know, my books reflect some very deep-seated and physically and emotionally, mentally, and otherwise exhaustive social justice issues that in many ways intersect with the work that each of you do. And so it is very tasking. And in that, I'd like to share a few things as part of my journey, and maybe in sharing that it may benefit other future authors or current authors even, and perhaps readers, educators, and others alike. And so first off, let me just say this. I have, while my PhD is in sociology, my very first degree is a bachelor's in English. I did not per se craft or anticipate every single step along the way in this journey to being an author. But I think that ultimately it came together in a way that I have always aspired, even as a child. And so I will invoke my mom at this point. She is deceased. But my very first college course that I sat in as a student in my mother's literature class, in an English class that my mom was taking as she was working on her associate's degree. And from that day to the next, it is interesting that was like one of my first direct intros to higher education. And then I would ultimately go on to earn, as my first degree, a degree in English. And so I've always had a passion for writing. There is absolute freedom and liberty in it. And so I see it as an outlet for resistance on so many levels. I have always been driven in terms of social justice. I understood that in some way or another, that it would be through media, whether print or broadcast, whatever the case might be, that I would be working tirelessly, that there has always been a conviction that I will work to combat all these issues that I knew, whether I could explain them at the time or not, that I knew were very, very oppressive in layers and creating domino effects of oppression for my people. Me and my people. And that said, and by extension, others as well, I will add. And so in that, one of the things I want to stress is commitment. As an author, I have, and I communicate the importance of being committed to the work, right? And when I say being committed to the work, not just the publication process, which can be tedious, give or take. It depends on who, I would imagine what press you're with. I have had great experiences personally, and my books have been published through UC Press, but the process can be tedious. For me, and I'll share my direct experiences again. When I say committed to the work, I mean in terms of, one, not just committed to the work in the sense that, okay, this is going to be a line on a CV. That is so incredibly, insulting and demeaning. I think that for me, I have preferenced commitment to the work, meaning commitment to freedom, commitment to liberation, and this being one more opportunity by which I can absolutely exhaust exhaust structures and systems and the like that have consistently worked in tandem to not have that happen. Space where I can also highlight and expand the conversation, center the experiences of people who, my people who would otherwise not have these same venues through which they can talk and have these conversations, be able to contextualize, be able to talk about the nuanced ways in which they live and experience these things in their everyday. And so, and I also understand, even in doing so, committing to these processes, which can again be exhaustive. And when I say exhaustive means, because once you commit to do it, right, you've got to, in many respects, I guess you don't have to, but for me, I have to see it through. And see it through in a way that does not ultimately, my thought is not immediately, how does this benefit me? And how does it, even though that is in the recesses of my mind, but ultimately making sure that in what I talk about and write about, that I am absolutely reflective of the people. I am absolutely reflective positively of the community in which I have worked in ways to advance them and explain some things so that other folks who don't go there, who would care less, might feel inclined to change policies and practices along the way. And so it's about compartmentalizing. Again, that's about commitment, compartmentalizing at least enough to work. I am very much fueled in my academic work. The written component, the research component is very much fueled by my convictions in terms of activism and, being boots on the ground as best as I can and exhausting spaces for doing that. But convicted to the degree that oftentimes even me being a member reflected in many of these instances, having to compartmentalize the racial trauma, racial and gendered trauma, intersectional harm that I myself incur, even as an author, even as a participant observer, those kinds of things, enough so that I can account, again, adequately and reflexively for all the things that's transpiring. So that means that sometimes between chapters, sometimes between pages, the Academy would like us to not really talk about that and to deal sort of in this space of, imagined objectivity. But the truth of the matter is I cannot and I will not act as if I'm non-existent in the fallout of these discriminative things. And so that means that sometimes I'm writing while wiping away tears. And sometimes that means I'm writing while feeling the weight and the burden of people who have interviewed with me and who have themselves dropped them in my presence, who are struggling. And I know that I am writing with the conviction of wanting to make sure, even well beyond the book, that I continue to express and highlight. And I've done it in other ways beyond the book, even, in op-eds and other things, because I also understand that in this process, as a Black woman, particularly, that there's this thing called invisibility. And so even in the work that I've done, it has garnered mass attention, much of which have been centered around Black citizen police conflict, uprising, and all those kinds of things. And I have been on the ground from the start and from the beginning, and in many respects have been overlooked, have been in many instances almost non-existent, because there's there's a particular kind of politics that sometimes happen even in these spaces, despite the fact that rooted in this work is social justice, right? There's a particular politic that sometimes come attached with publishing or visibility in terms of research. So you got to be almost at the right school, and you maybe need to be attached to the right circles of people, and maybe you need, in order for your name to resonate, right? And so it was the idea in some of my experiences that here I am conducting work, and I'm on the ground, and I'm in my own community in many respects, and conducting work about people, my people, and even including my own experiences, that there is international attention garnered, but not so much when it comes to acknowledging me as an expert at the helm of it, or acknowledging my work as front and center and immediate. It is the provocativeness that seems to attract both in and outside of the academy. These kinds of things I'm sharing because I think it's very important that there are some dynamics sometimes that even as authors, and even through the publication process and the commitment to social justice, the commitment to change, that it is so important that we maintain these spaces of visibility, right? And because what I have learned in the work that I do is that visibility for the publication in and of itself, even as an author, I was a little hesitant at one point because I thought that might make me appear pompous or, sort of self-centered in a particular way. But what I've come to grip with is that I don't really care what that means for people. But what I've learned as an author is that in the spirit of provoking social change and doing this work, factual work, it is doing this very factual work, that it is so important. The visibility of my work is so incredibly important, not just because I am perhaps this invisible Black woman, but if I go invisible, that means the participants, the interviewers, the experiences in my projects, right? The experiences of these people, my people, go invisible along the way. And so that cannot be. They cannot be. I cannot allow the undermining of that. And so I fight to have my name out front, to insert my name, to insert my book, to insert my work everywhere possible, because that's about inserting the people. That's about inserting their experiences. And alongside of that, it is also about inserting mine too. When I step into the streets, folks don't look at me and say, okay, that's Dr. Such and such, so somehow she's exempt. No. When I step into the street, that means that I'm also body on a line and subject to whatever the effects of protest might be, irrespective of my degrees, of my position, my spaces of privilege. And so it is in that. And I'm sort of giving it all this information. I guess my point, and I'm going to sum it up and sit down. I guess my point is that oftentimes my fear, and what I would encourage people to not do, is to go into publications as a trendy kind of, is a thing to be sort of included or a part of this trend. I'm I work very antithetical, and I speak antithetical to these notions of trendiness when it comes to social justice. Like, that's a moneymaker, and it's very performative. And so I encourage people that if this is something truly to do, while we can certainly do it for the sake of advancing our own careers and otherwise, I would strongly encourage folks, as these are lifelong pieces, these will forever exist throughout eternity, that they really and truly count for change. Like, what will your legacy be in the process of these publications? Those are the things I think about. What will history show in terms of literary contribution and otherwise that we have done in an effort to provoke change? And so it is in that space that I think I will close this out and have a seat. But I really want us to think about, and at least I try to talk about these things in a very substantive and deeply convicted way. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I was about to say, when I introduced you, how powerful you are, and you just did what I was supposed to say. So thank you, because it's all that energy that inspires us a lot. I mean, you all inspire us in many different ways. Now, let me introduce you to Victoria Reyes. She's Associate Professor of Gender and Sexuality Studies at the University of California, Riverside. She's a feminist scholar of culture, borders, and empire, and is author of the multi-award-winning Global Borderlands, published in 2019 by Stanford University Press. Her newest book, Academic Outsider, was recently published in July 2022 by Stanford Briefs, an imprint of Stanford University Press. I read it and I was so inspired that I got copies for my students and the students I work with that are Mellon Mays undergraduate fellows I work with this summer, and they all went back home with a copy of your book. Thank you. So please.
Thank you so much for that really kind and generous introduction. I don't know how to, well, let me start. As mentioned, and as many of my colleagues, I've written books and also articles. And my first book is very different than the dissertation, but it is kind of an academic book. I actually call it my odd little duck because it doesn't fit any neat categories, right? And that's one thing, is it was a story that I wanted to tell. And Fred Weary once told me, only I can write this book. And it gave me the confidence to continue to write. And I really he told that to me like 5-7 years ago or something. And it's something that I continue to write about. My second book, which just came out, as mentioned last month, it's a whole different aspect. So like everyone else, and many other people, COVID shattered my life. I'm a solo parent, an 8-year-old now, she's now 8, and a 4-year-old. My grandma lives with me. It's just the 4 of us. She had a heart attack just a few months before the COVID shutdowns. And it was so incredibly hard, alongside again, Black Lives Matter did not start in 2020, as Andrea mentioned, right? Or no, as all of us would talk about, like racism, intersectionality. Scholars of color, in particular feminist scholars, have long been writing about this. So the increased attention to kind of these racial reckonings alongside COVID, and for me, kind of really the loss of family to COVID, also to police, and all of these other things. I didn't know what to do. And so what came out was, I'm a writer. Writing is how I think. Writing is how I process. And so during COVID, what I did was I really kind of was just drawn to a lot of essay writers. I was drawn to bell hooks. I was drawn to Black feminist thought, in particular, Audre Lorde. In 2022, I feel like I always want to give them a shout out because their edited volume is so amazing. Zakiya Luna and Whitney Pirtle have this edited volume of Black feminist sociology. And it really was so transformative in thinking about a future for academic. And so with all of this in mind, and with decades of therapy, because of, my own trauma and processing it, this book came about. And really, it's a set of essays, and it's a set in kind of women of color feminisms, of writing from the personal, being vulnerable as a strength. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that, and really using that to critique academia. And as I write in the book, I actually think the content of what I write is not new, right? We know as feminists of color, people have been writing about this for so long. But for me, it really was this sense of vulnerability. And I am so lucky and grateful to have found an editor who believed in me, right? Because this isn't a traditional book, right? And it's published in a university press. And I'm lucky to have that. But part of this is I had to write it. It poured out of me. I couldn't put it back even if I wanted to. And I'm terrified. So far, it's gotten good reception, but I'm terrified of people reading things that are so vulnerable about me, and what to think. So how does this all kind of relate to publishing? I think what it means is it's being authentic, it's being genuine, and it's hard, right? Because academia is all about the neoliberal individual, highlighting the self, highlighting our own accomplishments at the expense of others. It's pretty easy to kind of claim novelty when you don't kind of have the feminists behind you. So for me, I write about in the last essay, it's kind of how do you maintain hope? And I really draw on people like Rebecca Solnit, who talks and distinguishes between optimism, which is believing things will be better no matter what we do, and hope, which is tied to action. You also have Sarah Ahmed, who talks about hope animates the struggle, and Marie Kaba, who talks about hope as a practice, right? You have to practice it every day. And so for me, I think it's really, I'm coming to a point where, yes, we could give you all these tips on how to publish, but really I think the important question is, who are you? Who are you as a scholar? What kind of scholar do you want to be? Who do you want to talk to, right? And really kind of having that commitment and thinking about what scholarly conversations you want to have and who wants to listen to you, right? I've spent my life trying to like get mainstream elite white sociology to prove that I'm good enough. But some people will never think I'm good enough. And yet, and this is what in 2019, someone at a Women of Color pre-conference at the National Women's Studies Association said, but there are a room of women right now who think each and every one of you is worthy enough and your contributions are valid. And so I think that it's really centering about who do you want to be? What kind of things do you want to write? What are your commitments? And staying true to that. The other thing I just want to briefly touch on is I think, yes, on one hand, publishing, writing, that's one thing. The other side of the coin is peer review. And I think it's incumbent on us. I mean, I'm where I'm at because of writing groups, primarily women of color, where you look for the potential, right? And you lift one another up. And I think thinking about these practices of care, what Zaki and Whitney talk about, a loving sociology. And I think we need to do that with one another in our writing groups. I think we also need to do that in our peer reviews, right? And call it out when we see other peer reviews that are hostile. And when we write peer reviews, looking for the potential to uplift, because it's so easy for academia to be competitive. You know, this is what I saw in my former department, I left, right? Is they think that giving more to someone else means less for them. But as feminists, we know that's not true. Right? We want to lift and support one another, and we should celebrate one another. So I think we have to also understand that and enact those practices in our peer review ourselves, as well as citation politics, right? And really thinking about reading widely, reading outside this narrow set of journals that you're taught to read in graduate school, and really practicing an intellectual humility that your idea is probably not the first idea on the topic, and we need to root it, and we need to think about who is invisible, because there are so many scholars, particularly Black women scholars, women of color scholars, others who have been writing about so many things that we are interested in. The other thing is there's a book that I try to commit myself to rereading every year, which is Sarah Ahmed's Living a Feminist Life, and really thinking and taking to heart kind of what Bell Hooks describes as integrity, right? Do our words match our practices and match kind of how we implement in our interactions? And as a feminist kind of organization and commitments, we need to practice those practices of care, which doesn't mean, and part of practices of care is also calling one another out, because we all make mistakes, right? But it's about creating a community where we can challenge one another from a loving place, where we can kind of come together and see kind of a more just future. Thanks.
Thank you, Victoria. And please let me introduce the last panelist, but not the what's the expression? Not the last, not the least, not the least. We are among old friends. So here we are, Roberta Villalón, the current president of SWF. Please, she's a professor of Sociology and Anthropology Department at St. Joe's University in New York. Roberta is the the current president, as I said, but she's also very active in different organizations, whether it's the International Sociological Association, the Latin American Studies Association. And I mentioned this because of her interest in bringing in other regions in her discussion. So not because I don't want to read your entire bio, but that's the part that I really like about what you bring to us, along with multiple publications. And I want to mention the last one that will be out in a month, and it's the book is entitled Migration, Health and Inequality, Critical Activist Research Across Ecuadorian Borders, that she did as a Fulbright scholar in Latin America. And I met her when she was doing that field work in 2016 in Lima, Peru. Thank you, Roberta.
Oh, thank you for that. And it's funny, like I have my heart beats fast, and there's very few people here, and we're among very kind souls, but it still makes me nervous to stand up and speak. But I wanted to start by saying that a lot of the things that were mentioned before resonate with me. And one thing that came to my mind and I added to my notes is that there's an additional layer to this, which is to be an author, I guess, a writer, in a language that is not my native language, right? So in a panel before, Veronica, you were talking about the accent, right? And how you felt home when you heard Esther Chow saying and making comments about that and how difficult it can be. And you know, when you're submitting a proposal, there's no accent, right? But still, right? You know that you're constantly ultra checking and super checking that what you're writing is written correctly. And there's a constant doubting, self-doubting about making sure that your work is grammatically correct, well expressed, well written. And so I came a long way in the sense that through the different experiences that I had publishing, I didn't lose that fear or the self-doubting, but I started to gain a little bit more confidence and say, well, there's some characteristics about the way I write that has to do with my background, my culture, and my original language. So, for example, very long sentences. Really long sentences, right, are characteristic not of me, but of our language, right? And also of our language and many writings, academic writings. So, for example, I always remember and my fellow companions here from Latin America know Alperindongui, right? The historian of Latin America. His sentences lasted 2 or 3 pages. It was insane, but he was also the best historian about that you could find at that time, right? Now there are better things written, but at that time about Latin America. So slowly I started to feel a little bit more confident that when sometimes these sentences came out too long and complicated, instead of cutting them down, I started to make sure that I could use, right, different, I guess, symbols and ways to still have them there, because there's something about them that I didn't want to just get rid of because they weren't streamlined enough. But so I also was thinking when I was sitting there, it's interesting that when I was thinking about what to say, that didn't even cross my mind that all of this publishing, right, that I've done, I did in a language that's not mine. So I had thought about speaking eventually, and I'll come to that point, about how important to me has been to be able to try to get some of the work that I did translated to Spanish, right? I had thought about that part, but I never thought about the others. So I just wanted to start with that because in a way I had normalized it so much that I am supposed to be writing in English and that's a completely normal thing to do, but it's not, right? And it's a big effort to write in English. So with that said, I'll go follow a little bit my notes in terms of a few things that I wanted to bring to this panel in terms of demystifying the process of publishing. So I wanted to start by talking about the first article that I published and how complex it was to reach to that point. But I think I was in a way lucky in the sense that I was able to find the right outlet for it. And I think that stayed with me very much because from the very beginning, I understood that getting rejected is definitely the norm, right? Like to send something and getting rejected, we know is the norm in academia. But also, we need to be really smart and strategic about where we're sending our work, right? Especially if what we're interested in is what Andrea was saying. We have a commitment to publish, not because of getting any kind of position or promotion, but at least I think in our case, we're committed to writing because we want to say what we were able to figure out, right? And we want to be able to share this. So if we don't find an outlet, that gets lost. Just exactly what you were saying, Andrea. So the first place where I published was in Latin American Perspectives, which is a journal that is devoted to Latin America. It is also the only journal that is openly leftist in the United States, right? And it's the only journal that also accepts submissions in other languages, Spanish and Portuguese specifically, and they translate them to English. But in my case, I didn't even know that the part of the translation. I submitted my work in English, and it was kind of the short version of my master thesis. So the master thesis, as you know, probably was like about what is it, a master thesis? Like 200 pages, I don't even remember. It had to be cut down, right? So the first challenge was to be able to shrink that very lengthy work. So there are all of these points that I feel like we usually get discouraged and we may get paralyzed and then quit. And again, what always kept me writing was, besides the fact that I wanted to be able to share, right, that knowledge, was that I wanted to be able, I had to be convinced that I had something to say, right? So in this case, the 200 pages had to become, I don't know what, 7,000 words, which is what, 15 pages? I don't even know. But I had to say it. So I did it, even if it was very painful to cut all the meat out of that thesis. The next bigger, I'm just talking about the bigger moments that happened was that I got a contract to publish what was my dissertation. But I continued the research and I had changed it significantly. And in that case, my driving force was that the stories of this, the book with violence against Latina immigrants, I forget the second part of the title, but it's about, it's the only book that is written about Latina immigrants that are survivors of gender violence. There was nothing written back then. There's still nothing written in the length of the book. So I wanted to be able to have that published because the same thing that Andrea said, because if not, who was going to tell that story? Why was I doing that research if it was not going to get published and out there? So in that case, I was also pregnant and I had to finish things. And I also had to be able to get to the point, let's say, the other side of the bridge. So again, while I was having a lot of doubts about being able to write and being able to finish, was that the best way I could do? I could say it? Was that all that I had to say? Again, what I thought was like, well, this is what I can say about this right now. And I have to be at peace with that, right? Because I could have probably written it better. I could have probably done a more sophisticated analysis. But at that time, that's what I had, and I wanted it to be out there. So I think that being able to get over that point where you're just self-doubting so much that you don't think it's ready, and that's what you can say at that moment, and that's important that you move forward in that sense. The other major experience that I had was about coordinating a special issue also in Latin American perspectives, actually, that was about collective memory related to human rights abuses in Latin America. And that was, again, very dear to me, right? I being born in Argentina during the military regime with disappearances, etc., without getting too much in detail, it was very important for me to be able to move forward with this work. So I had written something, many years had passed, and there has started to be a flourishing of new work from new generations being done, not just in Argentina, but in different parts of Latin America. So there, I was very clear in my head that this was not my research only. This was a matter of gathering what people were doing and what people were doing in Latin America, and to bring it to the US, because now I could see, right, a lot of publications that were very important and interesting being done in America, but you couldn't access them or they were not available in the US. So I did the call for papers. I got the proposals accepted by Latin American perspective. And then the call for papers, almost I became like a crazy recruitment. Like I went to all the conferences I could. I went to LAS, I went to the American Sociological Association, the Latin American Sociological Association. I went to Argentina, I went everywhere, and I connected with a lot of people. And I was going around with the call for papers saying, please, the work that you're doing is very important. I want your submissions, and you can submit in your own language. You don't have to write them in English. We'll work on the translations. And that project ended up becoming a 3 volumes of a special issue on Latin American perspectives. And then it became also an edited volume for classroom use. And it grew much bigger than what I had originally thought, but it wasn't because of the work I was doing. It was because this was happening, right? So there was that connection with a specific political and historical moment that in a way I was trying to capture, and it became this publication. And the final thing that I'm going to say, because I have just a little bit of time, is related to the book that you just mentioned that is now about to come out, Migration, Health, and Inequalities, Critical Activist Research Across Ecuadorian Borders. And that book is my author book. It's not an editorial work. And in that case, when I was trying to find a contract, right, and when I was working with the editor that signed the contract with me, which is Bristol University Press, I had 2 very clear ideas in my mind, which was the first one, I wanted to make sure from the very beginning that I was going to get support from the publishers to find some other press that would translate the book to Spanish, which is something that unfortunately never happened with my first book, which I tried on my own to figure out how to get it translated to Spanish, because it would be much more useful than having it in English, but it could never happen. So that was a priority for me. And in a way, I was trying to make sure that the publisher that contracted with me would prioritize that. And then the second part of it was that I think because of the different experiences that I had so far, I was more, I guess assertive would be the word, in the way I communicated with my editor in terms of trying to get extensions, especially because all kinds of things happened after I signed the contract, from being chair to COVID, and things got kind of out of control in terms of timing, that I know that 10 years ago, I would have never had the courage to tell them, please give me an extension. I can't finish the book right now, right? And now I was able to talk to them, and they were understanding. But I think it had to do not just with the context, but also to feeling that it's okay to ask for an extension. It's okay to tell them that you need more time to work out the ideas that you were developing. And to end, I promise, the other thing that came up in my head when people were talking was like how important and decisive in all of these moments were the works from other people, not just academic works, all kinds of publications, right? Besides the communities that I was involved with and the causes that I was involved with. because they were inspiring in the sense that they were kind of models, right? Like I really wanted to be able to take the ways they were expressing things and sharing things to my own work. And so I think it's important that we understand those relationships and we credit them, which of course I do in the work, but now I don't have time to mention everybody. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Roberta. The floor is open, so if you have a question.
Hi, my name is Veronica Montes. Thank you, Barrett. So I was just stretching, but I was planning on saying something. You just read my mind. Thank you, Barrett. No, I wanted to say that thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Because I was thinking, I was writing down, like some of ideas, but I think I really appreciate this space, or especially what you like share with us, because more than, every time when we are going to these panels about how to write, right, how to publish, they give us, like very technical advices, which are important. But I think here, so you are putting your skin here. And you are taking us through, the different phases in which, as women, and particularly, every single aspect that you mentioned, it resonates with me, right? So when Tracy was saying, writing from that sense of, like feeling that you don't belong to the academia, thinking about where you're coming from, I was like, wow, you are just like saying what I many times, I feel. And when Andrea was talking about like your encouragement to write from, the commitment and, like what we're doing, right? So I think this is something that, I think that's the passion that we put in what we do and the way we are going to be writing. And thank you so much, Victoria, because when you were talking about writing, with that sense of vulnerability, right? And that sense of like feeling like, if what you are doing is how it's going to be ready, right? Putting yourself there. And thank you so much, because we haven't keep talking about like what you have been doing by putting yourself there. So it has been so inspiring. And thank you so much, Roberta, because I think I put it like, when you were saying like writing in a language that is not your language, I was thinking about, like embracing, and a long time ago, I was like trying to, reconcile my own story, because it's like my accent, my this, my there. And I start like trying to switch, like instead of seeing those as weaknesses, it's like my strength. And I think writing by embracing who we are, I think that's the process. And I think it's so wonderful to see to see myself in each one of you. I think that's beautiful. And I think this is a great space where probably coming together to write something, what it is writing as feminists, the passion, all the things that I think we put there, and, changing, as Victoria was inviting us to change, like what it means academia. What we are writing, who we are writing for, right? I think those are very interesting and very important. I think, I don't know where, but that's just an idea, and I just throw it out there for you to think about it, where we can, I don't know, putting together all these different, I think, ideas that you share with us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, as I was listening to everyone, things that I heard in common were both, self-doubt, like, do I have the right to be telling this story? Do I have what's my space? But also the amount of advocacy each of you, and the right to feel entitled, right? To say, no, this is what I need from my publisher. No, I need this to be visible, not for me. So I think we misinterpret entitlement. And I learned about entitlement by cleaning houses for rich people. So I didn't learn about entitlement from my own family, but I watched what rich people did, and I'm like, learned how to use that as a tool, not for myself, but for other people. So that's what Andrea is doing. That's what Roberta is doing. It's what Victoria is doing. And so I think that's in terms of demystifying the work of publishing. I was thinking about how we developed this sense of entitlement in ourselves, where we are, most of us, coming from this place of self-doubt that, do I have a right to tell a story? And then in this academic world where a lot of our colleagues are doing it for their own, I want to get published, I want to get tenured, I want to do this. I mean, all the proceeds of my text go to grow food. That's where it goes. I don't put it in my bank account. It goes directly to buy seeds. So you use the book, we grow food. And I know that what y'all are doing with your work, it's not about that you can be this self-important person at ASA, but it's getting the stories told of other people. So how can we develop a kind of a socially just sense of entitlement? I think it'd be great. So.
I just want to say thank you to Tracy, because, to everyone, but it's very important what you said, because you also show how in your writing and even in thinking about the books or the things that you write, you were inclusive of your students or your TAs, and I was your TA. And I learned so much from you. And it was like the best lecture ever. and it's very, and also, I got some of what you said, like, I hate textbook, and when I had to decide what textbook I'm going to use, so by writing your textbook, you done great. And so I just want to thank you for being inclusive in the process of writing that kind of text, besides just writing also about our research or other things that we do. So I think that is very important, because there are different kind of writing, like, and there are different audiences, and all of you brought different ones. So inclusive in your students, the people that you work with, thinking of what is that I want to say. I hate reproducing this that has been done before, right? And that happens to me all the time when you decide what book I'm going to use. I hate all of this. How do I do it? How do I tell the student, you have to read this, and then I come and say, but all of this is wrong, right? And everything, every one of you for embracing different ways of saying things, including yourself, making yourself vulnerable, I think is also important. Obviously for different audiences, but so just thank you, everyone.
I want to thank all of you too. I think one of the things that I was thinking about as all of you were talking is the emotional toll that the work that you are doing takes. And I think that's one of the themes that, really resonates with me as well, that when you do work that you care about and that you're trying to say something, to change, to make social change, to change a field, to change ideas, there oftentimes is that emotional toll, right? And so I'd love to hear from some of you your strategies for thinking about how to take care of yourself and to deal with that kind of, I think there's energy that comes from that work. And so that's really important. But at the same time, there's an emotion, like there's a draining, So I'm just curious what you do to balance that.
Okay, I'll try to give some insight on that. More immediate, when we think about the emotional toll, I am momentarily right now trying to put together a support group in a very different way from what I have had to do with the first two books. Because in this instance, we are now on the heels of 2+ years worth of pandemic. Racial hate has soared in ways that it is almost not even possible to leave the house without being racially or intersectionally injured. In fact, you can be that in the house. Not having, So the political climate has made it very necessary for me to start recrafting and shaping spaces and people through which I decompress. And decompressing is so very important in this work because, again, one of the things I spoke about earlier was the fact that social justice work and the work that I do, which oftentimes puts me directly in the path in some very compromising ways, whether I'm in the streets, in direct protest and direct action or otherwise, doesn't oftentimes mean people recognizing or authority caring or recognizing my titles. I'm, at the end of the day, Black, and at the end of the day, a Black woman, and at the end of the day, a target, a movie oftentimes in these particular ways. And that is in addition to the fact that I do have some privileged spaces. So I want to recognize that too. But that said, I'll give an example. So like with, you can't stop the revolution. In the first few pages, I talk about how police dogs were being, they had brought dogs out on us, just within hours of Michael Brown Jr.'s being killed. Just within hours of the crime scene tape coming down. Just within hours of me personally watching the very early minutes and hours of his family emotionally unraveling at the scene. Just within the first few, this is before the world chimed in. It was enough before the world learned of this. There had already been enough that had transpired, honestly, that could have easily mentally and emotionally broke me. And even this year will be 8 years on the heels of the Ferguson uprising. And from that moment in 2014 up until now, August 9th of 2014, up until what's going to be in a few days, the 8th year, there's still so much about what happened within those 3 years plus, those 4 years, plus worth of time that I have not even been able to unpack. And when I say so much, I'm talking about trauma. Because there's no space to communicate what it feels like to stand under a tank. Like, these things are shocking to the psyche for hours at a time, days at a time, and to know that it's your nation. And that every core of you, every part of you've done nothing wrong, but to understand that you have easily, just by virtue of being at the scene, you've become an enemy combatant to your country. Like, that's like, it's a lot to like try to mitigate what that like really. So I'm just saying that to say that there is, commitment for me meant writing about these things, like having to decompress in a way so I can have a clear mind enough to sit down and articulate the things, yes, but also feel free enough to articulate the direct impact is communicated by the people, but also communicated because I'm one of the people. And so there's a long road to that didn't cut off when we leave campus. There's a long process to that doesn't stop when the class is in, when the speaking engagements are over, when the panels and the sessions stop. The pain of it all does not end when the books come out and adoptions happen, the pain of it all doesn't end. Whether we're in conference or not, it's an ongoing work that doesn't get factored in and that is not understood or seen in those lines on the CV. I have to try to navigate the pain of it all when I go to bed at night, when I wake up in the mornings, because there's still, again, 8 years worth of stuff that never made the news, right? That is felt. And so academia would want us to not talk about that, right? Because then that means you're not being objective. But here's what I also understand when people ask me, are you too close to this work? No one asks police officers if they're too close to the work when they go back to the streets, whatever that means. No one asks. Like, how often do we hear those questions across professions? But then as a Black woman, who can best tell the story from 1,000 different angles? Then somehow I need to be very, very conscientious of whether I'm too close. No, I'm actually not the last person. I'm actually the first person, because my accounting is accurate, comparable to the many papers you're going to read. I was in it. I stood there from the beginning. I mean, my point is that there is this very disordered, which is what I talk about, disorder, very disordered way in which we think about, or at least people work to rule out marginalized scholars, women of color, Black women like me particularly, rule us out and make us feel less than in some respect if we are transparent mentally and emotionally in these processes. And that in and of itself exacerbates and compounds the injury. And I will not partake in it. I am learning, even in these years and even in these processes, how to empower myself. I will not be dictated or succumb to these ideas of illegitimacy. I am the most legitimate scholar to have this conversation. I will own that. And in every space, that will be my approach. I should not be the last. I should actually, in many respects, be the first. Coming on the heels of a long line of women of color, Black women particularly, who have paved the way in blood, literally, so that this space and these opportunities might be endeared to me. And so it is in that space and for the sake of the people in which I engage with, in the stories in which they entrust me with, that I, good, bad, or indifferent, again, have fully committed to all the things that this means, physically, mentally, and emotionally, while trying to wisely find spaces and opportunities to work towards healing. Thank you.
Is it on? Yeah.
Hi, Andrea. Thanks for that. Thank you. I arrived late and I apologize because I had to stay after the ASA plenary session for an interview. I don't know if you all talked about this already, but based on Andrea's intervention, I would like to hear a little bit about what you do for self-care, right? Given this context, because writing is by itself, I mean, writing can also help us in this process as a catharsis, and because it can also help us with our own thoughts. But it also exposes us, as you've all mentioned. And I was, wondering, I would like to hear more about what you do explicitly to take care of yourself in that sense. And the other thing I wanted to do, Dre, is just to connect what you just said to what Mary Romero said this morning in the first plenary of the day. She was saying, well, when white people study white communities, no one tells them you're too close to this. No one tells them this is a problem. And when they study communities of color, then it's actually, rewarded. And that's like, oh, that is so interesting, so innovative. But when we people of color do the same thing with our communities, then it becomes problematic. And a tweet by a friend and a colleague of mine, Loria Garcia Peña, she was saying the same thing the other day on Twitter. She was saying, oh, so interesting. When one of us wants to study, Dominican problems and Dominican situations, then it's too narrow. But now that a white scholar wants to do it, it's very innovative. It's magical. She was very sarcastic, of course. But, that's part of what is happening. So thank you. Thank you again.
So I just said there, I can say very little about self-care. But because in a way, I feel like I know it is an important question. I'm not disregarding self-care, but at the same time, I feel like there's this tendency to divide the work from our personal, from the feelings, from our private life. And I feel it's also intertwined. That I don't know, if self-care is specifically related to how painful or stressful or frustrating writing or dealing with things related to work were, right? Or what's happening around us, right? Politically, in our society, in our communities, beyond that. And probably I'm doing a really bad work at self-caring, but I try to open up because, I get it. It's difficult and it's traumatizing and it's painful and all of that. But at the same time, I don't feel that I'm that important and that my feelings are that important. So usually I just focus on the bigger picture, right? On the bigger picture of I'm doing this research or I'm writing because of this reason that is much more important than how I'm feeling right now. So if I'm feeling poorly, I'll take a break. But I don't know if I can take, it's not like Dre was saying, the pain doesn't go away because you finish writing, right? Or I do therapy, and thank God, and my therapist in the acknowledgements of my last book. I put her there because really I couldn't have been able without therapy, right? But still, that didn't really solve the pain or and it's not just my personal pain. It's like, I'm gonna curse in Spanish. Coño, que is horrible because you keep reading and seeing and experiencing, again, Dre was saying this on the other panel, again and again and again the same thing, and it's really it's really tiring in many ways. That I don't feel like self-care is the solution. Basically, I don't find that self-care, but I still try to have a good time. I dance, I walk. I connect with people that I love and that love me, and I connect again with the bigger reasons why I'm still involved in that, and I don't just switch off and devote myself to something else and be on denial on everything that's happening. Because really, I think the only way is to deny it all, not to be feeling like shit.
Can I respond to that? Because maybe we're not using the same definition of self-care. When I think about self-care, I'm thinking about Audre Lorde, right? I'm thinking about, wait a minute, when I take care of myself, and you just gave several examples of that, right? So dancing is my favorite form of self-care too. Therapy is one of them as well. All those things that we do, that is self-care for me. I'm not talking about self-care as, denying the pain or denying that we're going through all of this. The communities that we're part of and the fights that we're part of, that's just not possible, right? And that pain is not going to go away anytime soon. But I was, just to give you an example, I was having a conversation with one of the youngest members of the Latin Plus collective with Christina when we left from here to go to the plenary at ASA. And just to give you an example, I was almost fainting because I hadn't had lunch. I slept like 3 hours last night to be here at the panel. And she's much younger than me. And she was like, no, we need to stop and have something to eat. And she had to convince me, right? Which is completely irrational, right? Like if I had fainted, I wouldn't have made it anyway, right? And I was telling her, I think that is one of the things that we can learn from your generation. There's not necessarily, and I'm not talking about anyone here, I'm talking about my own experience and my feminist colleagues in the Dominican Republic. I see many of the feminists in my generation and the generations that are older to mine doing a lot of our activism out of this, what I call martirologio, right? So it's like, oh, I need to suffer. I need to skip lunch to be doing everything that I need to be doing. I shouldn't exercise. I shouldn't do, I'm not exaggerating. Like these are things that I've actually heard people saying, right? And I just gave you an example of myself. So that's what I mean, because otherwise everything we're doing is not sustainable. And that's the part that I'm also concerned about. And that's why I'm saying when I think about self-care, I'm thinking about Audre Lorde. I'm thinking about self-care as an act of political warfare itself. I'm not thinking about the whitewashed, mindfulness. Let's not talk about anything bad. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something that is like very, very political for me. And that's why I asked the question. Someone else.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for your comments. I was kind of listening in the hallway before coming in because the conversation was just so rich. So part of what I'm curious about around publishing in particular is I just graduated this summer. And so I'm thinking about, thank you. I'm celebrating all summer. So yes. But just thinking about like, what does it mean to train graduate students to transition from writing the dissertation into a book, right? Or thinking about the series of articles that will come from it, because it just seems like, and maybe this is just the experience, that I'm having along with other people of color, women of color in particular, across the discipline in graduate programs, we are not getting the mentorship. We are being systematically excluded from mentorship, like Andrea was talking about. So how do we reverse that? Or what are some strategies that I can put in the group chat right now, because there is about 1,000 of us in a group chat just to support each other, right? That we started in 2016. So, just thinking about, because one of my mentors has told me that I need to get my book proposal out by the spring. So just thinking about that transition from dissertation to book.
Actually, one of the things I had notes on, and then I didn't get to do that, but I think finding mentors and in a broader sense is so critical, because really, and then finding the wrong mentors can be so detrimental that it's just crazy, right? Like how a mentor can be a broker that opens doors and paves your way, or they can be the exactly opposite. We do have in SLUS a writing group that meets. I'm looking at it because I forget what day they are. There she is. That meets frequently, and she'll give us the information later. And I think that's a great way to find that support and a place where you can meet and at least be in that place together. I think that one of the best kind of, it's almost like a motto that I was given, not by my mentor, but by somebody, and that I kept, with me, is that there's that moment, right? Like when you stop being a graduate student, that you really, before you also own your voice, right? But there's that moment where you can really find that voice and not be scared about it, and not be, trying to mask it in different ways, right? Because, for example, I remember for my dissertation, based on my experience, I did activist research, and it was a feminist of color, the colonial, all of the stuff was there. And when I was writing the dissertation, I was specifically requested, order to take those things out of it, because it was not going to let me get a job. It was not going to let me publish. It was not going to allow me for this and that. And I know times have changed and people have more space to be able to be vocal about that. But the moment I left and I was trying to, do the book proposal and get a book proposal, those were the first things that I put in that proposal, because I was against the idea of masking that part of the research, because it was integral to it. So I think that a key to be able to do that shift is to say, well, this was my voice to begin with. These are my ideas, and I'm going to keep, at them, because if not, you will never be really writing exactly from where you want to write and being who you are when you're writing.
Thank you. Anyone else?
So logistically, I never, when I was a graduate student, I never understood when people were like, "Oh, how are you going to change your dissertation into a book?" I was like, "I'm writing it like a book, so I don't need to, right?" And then I took time away, right? After you start your first year, my first year in the tenure track was the most difficult, and I was lucky to take a postdoc, but it was the stepping away and then revisiting it. And then it was exactly what Roberta said, is finding your voice and what is it you want to say. A book, I think, allows so much more freedom than an article. And I think logistically, the book publisher, my first book was rejected by everybody except Stanford. No one wanted it, right? Like, I talked to so many different publishers and they just weren't interested in it. And then I was like, okay, well, this was soon after I got my PhD. Then it's like, I write the book that I want to write. And then it was finding right mentors. I think in terms of peer mentoring, I think mentoring is at different levels, right? So the peer mentoring and writing groups. So there are different kinds of writing groups where you either write together or you comment on people's writings. I also think something that is not explicit, but that a lot of people do and has been incredibly helpful for me for both books, is when you have a draft, seeing if your institution can give you money to have a book workshop, which is inviting senior scholars and thinking about who do you want to write your tenure letters, right? And to come together and really give you feedback on it. And that was, for both my books, a really transformative experience where you have these senior scholars who you respect, really in-depth read and give you that feedback. But of course, also that daily feedback of my friends, my colleagues, who I can have what I call my throw up version, which is just, I need to get it on paper, my thoughts out. I needed that too. So it's like these different levels of feedback and revision. But I think the key thing to a book is that there's a lot more freedom in form, in style, and in what you want to say. And you're allowed to do that in ways you can't necessarily do in an article.
Thank you. Yes, I would say so. A couple things. One, I also wanted to weigh in on Esther's comment a minute ago. Esther, I actually have a piece, a book chapter that I have co-authored with with a graduate student and some junior faculty on what Toni Morrison would refer to as the white gaze and the pressure of feeling like you need to write for a white audience or write in a particular way to appease white readers and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to just kind of acknowledge what you were previously talking about. As far as the publication process, I have always been amenable to being a book author. That was actually a childhood aspiration. So that's all how that would pan out. I wasn't quite sure, I said previously, but that was always something that I anticipated to be. Writing has always been a strength for me, and it is liberating to be able to do that. And I believe, as Victoria mentioned, even more so, writing a book, you have the space and opportunity in a way to really make the work even more of what you imagine it to be, or to surpass or push the limits or the boundaries, whatever that means, comparable to writing a dissertation. I think in terms of the dissertation, at some point, the idea is carving out that space in completion, right? But the completing of that then positions you to really have a fuller conversation about the things that are so near and dear to the work that you do. And so I also had the benefit of committee members. So my first book became is an extension of my dissertation. And I had committee members who, even in my defense, were clear about, Drea, you really this needs to be a book. So right away, I had people, thankfully, that were in my immediate circle who were advocating for me to do that, which was very important. And so in the process of doing that, what I would suggest is that you find folks who in some ways will positively help you to discover if your strength, because I know different people talk about different things. Some people pursue books. Other people feel like their strength is in writing articles. I don't know what that means or looks like for different people, but I think it's important to know what that might mean for you as an individual, and what, because each calls for different variations of commitment, variations of approaches and things like that, but how that might fit or comport with the way in which you work, and to find people who will positively help you think about that, and work in tandem to support that, being able to connect with publishers who are amenable and receptive to the work that you do. Is the other thing. Not every publisher or editor. That's the other important thing. Editors, and so what those interactions look like and mean is very, very important. Acquisition editors, the persons that you have those front, kind of, or intro conversations with. And then also, what that might mean, even in a publishing process, book or articles, whatever the case might be, how does that comport or play into your long-term professional agenda? And not because that's most important, but my thought is that as you're doing this work and promoting justice in whatever range or respect and, way that you are, that it also that part of the justice is also about justice for you. And so justice for the community as well as justice for you. And how might that work to also build and strengthen your position to circle back and provoke and push justice at a different level in different spaces, at different times, in different ways, professionally and otherwise too. So.
Thank you so much. We are past the hour by 5 minutes. This is incredible. I would like to, I have a lot of ideas, and I have a set of words that came up to me when I was hearing all of you, but I will spare you from that. Today, I would like to ask all the members of the audience to give a round of applause to our wonderful panel. Thank you so much.